Hello everybody. Welcome to the prep for a great lobby meeting breakout session. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Amy Bennett. As Director of Congressional Liaisons and Lobby Days, Amy Bennett provides training and support to volunteer liaisons as they build relationships with congressional offices and help representatives move up the ladder of support for effective legislative action. She is responsible for organizing CCL's Lobby Days in Washington, D.C., including mentoring liaisons on how to schedule and organize congressional meetings and to maintain productive dialogues throughout the year. So Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Well, we're going to start off, if we could just jump to the next slide. So what we have today as far as our learning goals is, I hope to give you an idea of what your lobby team may have done so far. They've been doing a lot to let you know. Many of you know that. Many of you have been participating in that. And to give you a sense of context of what we're going after here, it's all about building relationships with our member of Congress. And I also want to give you the idea of the flow of what a meeting is like and what the roles in those meetings are, just so you can kind of set your expectations. And for some of you, you've been in meetings before, but every meeting's different. And also just a reminder about, well, I don't know how many of you were on the morning session with Mark and Harihan and Shiling Su and John Woods, but John Woods said something I really enjoyed, saying that we need to be urgently patient. And I was thinking of the tortoise and the hare race, right? Who wins? The tortoise. So we want to meet people where they are, and that is often hard to kind of constrain ourselves and say, we're really going to meet people where they are, even though we really want to get moving on this climate issue ASAP. So we want you to imagine meeting with your member of Congress if it's the first time. And often these meetings are with staff, just so you know, they're staff level meetings. Some of them will be what we call face-to-face. But think of it as just as if you're meeting a new neighbor. You're wanting to get them to know them, start the relationship or build on the relationship, rather than your new neighbor moves in and the first thing you ask is, can you trim the tree that's hanging over into my yard? So patience, have fun in your meetings. This is democracy in action. Okay, so we are 195,000 strong. CCL is really growing. We're all about the sustainability of the climate and empowering you. Again, we're working on building relationships based on shared values. And the idea is to move the member up the ladder of support for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So I work with liaisons, and many of you on the call here I see are liaisons, and the liaisons are the main point of contact with the members. So they have been already working on setting up these meetings. We have over 335 already set. We expect anywhere from 400 to maybe 450 meetings by when all is said and done. But unlike when we had in the past lobbied in Washington, D.C. in person, we used to send out your schedules to you in advance. With the virtual lobby meetings, we're learning new things. We're having some actual great opportunities this way, but the local teams, the chapters and the local chapters or by state, and with the help of sometimes state coordinators and regional coordinators, the local groups are figuring out who is going to be part of that meeting team. So clearly by the polling, a lot of you have already realized you're in a meeting. You probably had some practice sessions already. And for those of you who would like to be in a meeting next year, I definitely think you ought to reach out to your chapter leader or your group leader. If you're in an area where there's no chapter yet or you don't know of the chapter, please reach out to CCL membership coordinator and find out who your state coordinator or regional coordinator is, and you can find out who to contact more locally. And the top priorities for our meetings this fall are going to be getting more co-sponsors of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. We would love to have 100 co-sponsors by the end of the year. We're at 81 now, plus Deutsch would make 82, I think. And we've made significant progress in this period called lame duck before. So there's really room for a lot of forward motion. If your member's already a co-sponsor, you may be asking the member to be sure they will co-sponsor again in the new year. We hope to have the Energy Innovation Act reintroduced early in 2021. And if they are a Senate member, As you might know, Senator Coons and Senator Jeff Flake were the ones who introduced the bill in the Senate in 2018. We're hoping to have that introduced again. So the Senate request is again to support that by reaching out to Senator Coons. He is the contact in the Senate for the bill being, we hope, brought forward soon in the Senate. What if you have a retiring member? It's a great time for something you might call maybe an exit interview. You may not get the member, you may end up meeting with staff, but it's a wonderful way of getting feedback on how did we do with the office as CCL members? How could we be more effective? How does the member or the staffer see the possibilities for climate action in 2021? Who should we be reaching out to in the district? Getting their input. They have a view of their constituency that might be a little different from ours. Obviously, climate is our big issue, but for a member of Congress or the staff, they've got a lot of things they're working on, and their perspective and their feedback could help us do a better job in the new year. So what are the roles in a meeting? We're going to go through these pretty quickly. Excuse me, there's a meeting lead or facilitator. That's oftentimes the liaison or an experienced volunteer. There's the appreciator. We love to start our meetings of saying something that we appreciate about the member. A time monitor who monitors the amount of time that we're spending in the meeting. They might ask the member, how much time do you have? And then also keep track of what percentage of time we were talking versus the member or the staffer. And also they monitor or count the number of open-ended questions we asked. Again, good feedback for us to be tracking that information. We also have a note taker or a minute taker who mostly jots down what the member or the staffer says. And then after the meeting, we sometimes have a separate meeting to review that and make sure that's all correct. And then it's submitted online by the note taker within 48 hours. There's the asker. That's the person who makes our ask. Will you support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act? Now, oftentimes we have secondary asks. As Danny mentioned earlier today, we're really focusing on the Energy Innovation Act this year. So the focus is on that for December meetings. The deliverer. Now, oftentimes we have a one-page ask. This year we have a two-page ask. And actually we're asking the liaison or the deliverer to send that in advance. So check with your team leader. We're sending that in advance so that the staff or the member can review it ahead of time. And then there may be other things that are delivered, such as endorsements or letters or something like that. Again, because of the virtual nature of things with COVID, that can be sent in advance or afterwards. Then there's follow-up. We always want to plan for follow-up. It's always important to remember if the member looks like they might want to endorse, co-sponsor the bill, that we get back to them. In fact, we have to get back to them pretty quickly in order for them to do it. We think December 18th is about the deadline there. So if you need follow-up probably needs to be within about a week. And then tech support. You'll have a tech support person so that they can just make sure everyone's muted. Sometimes people forget, take care of meeting security and all of that. So there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end to the meeting. And of course, in the beginning, you're doing your appreciations, as we mentioned, and introductions and such. But then in the middle of the meeting, you're going to be having a discussion, and then everyone's going to be participating. And we love to ask open-ended questions so that we get the member or the staffer talking. The more we can learn about what their concerns are, what they're supportive of, the more we can learn about what they're thinking, the better we can do our jobs as advocates. So we'll be, your plan, which has already been probably very finalized, many of you may already have been in practice sessions while you review this, but you may have quite a few open-ended questions you're going to be asking. Also, it's important for us to be sure we're truly listening so that we maybe be sure that we're patient and let them finish their answers completely, ask for clarification, that type of thing. I know for me, I'm the kind of person who I like really want to get to the punchline. I'm the kid in the back seat of the car who's asking, when do we get there, over and over again when we're on a trip, right? So be sure you let the person answer fully, check that inner child who wants to get there too soon, and make sure you fully heard them. So some of the questions you might ask are, How can CCL improve the work in the state or district to build political will for climate action? Who should we be listening to in the state or district? What are your perspectives on climate policies in 2021? I love this, getting to their thinking about what they see in the future. Do you see any particular opportunities or challenges in 2021? What are your legislative priorities in 2021? Your member may be on various committees and have a lot of work on those committees to do, and it's good just to know what else they're doing. For a retiring member, you might ask them what their plans are. And if you're meeting with a staffer of a retiring member, it's great to try to get to know them a little bit and where they're headed, what their future plans are. Many of them stay on the Hill and they go off and they work in another office and they carry this CCL message with them. We've seen this time and time again. All right, here's a few tips. A few don'ts, mostly do's. Do participate in the rehearsal. You probably already have. Do join the meeting a little bit early so that you can rename yourself or whatever the team has decided on. Do follow the agenda that's been planned, your assigned role, but also be flexible. Dress in business attire and definitely check your lighting. Also be sure you check how you look. The camera's on you all the time, so be sure you're smiling. And follow the team's plan for either muting or unmuting or however you want to name yourself. Some of the groups are going to say, for instance, ask you to rename yourself Amy Bennett with your city and your state. That way your member knows that you're a constituent. Just a few tips. We just had an election, and let's say you're meeting with your member and you like that member and you voted for that member. Remember, we're a nonpartisan group, so we don't want to be talking about who we voted for in the election. So do keep it nonpartisan. Confidentiality is a big thing. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but we need it to build trust. So anything said in a member meeting is kept confidential. We don't share that with other members outside of our chapter. And we even remind our chapter members that it's confidential, especially when you have a meeting and there's new chapter members who kind of don't understand the concept of confidentiality in congressional meetings. What you could share is something like, I really felt encouraged by the meeting, but do leave any details or what was said out of that. Just be self-aware, listen fully. If you happen to interrupt, like I would totally do, just catch yourself, apologize, and let them keep talking. Oftentimes it's good to just ask for clarification. Can I ask what you meant by that? Can you tell me a little bit more? That type of thing. And before we go on to Q&A, because I want to have lots of time for Q&A, I do want to remind you, in your questions, do leave your member of Congress's name and anything said in a meeting out of your question. And please type those questions in the chat or raise your hand with this *9 icon and we'll call on you. And Morgan will let me know the questions are going to her. So do use the raised hand icon or ask Morgan, and then Morgan will read the questions.
All right, Amy, so we do have quite a few in the chat that I can start us off with.
Okay.
All right, so some of the questions that we're getting are about the timing of members who want to co-sponsor the bill when it's reintroduced in 2021. So do they need to inform Deutsch's office in December to be on the initial list, or how does that process go?
That's a great question. I'm not actually sure I know the answer to that. I know that Deutsch would like to introduce very early in 2021. We will likely be talking about that. And yes, normally they would contact Deutsch's office about that. So they can, and they usually know who it is, who the staffer is in Deutsch's office to contact. So any of you who are liaisons and who get back to your member about that, we will have his aide's name and email address available to you all to contact if you want to give that to your member of Congress or the staffer that you work with your member's office. Yes.
Great. And then some questions about advice for meeting with a new member. So if your member of Congress is leaving, what's some advice for the new members when they come in and when you meet with them?
Oh, I actually plan on putting together a checklist for kind of onboarding a new member. What do you want to inform that member of? How do you want to make introductions? What are the most important things to research about your member? So that's actually looking ahead to 2021 meetings rather than the ones we're in now, because we are meeting with the outgoing members now. New members, I think it's January 3rd, right, Morgan, that they're all being sworn in? Other than Senator Kelly, who just got sworn in already because that was an interim interim election.
Mhm.
But we will be working on what are the most important things to introduce your member to. Remember, you're just building a relationship, not just with the member, but with their staff. In terms of your expectations, a lot of these new members won't be fully staffed for a few months. If you happen to introduce yourself during the campaign before the election this year, and a few of our groups have done that. They've gone to town halls, they've reached out in a nonpartisan way to introduce themselves to the people that were running it for the House or the Senate. And so some of you actually do know some of the campaign staffers, and some of those staffers move on, not all of them, but some of them move on to actually work for the member of Congress in DC or in the district office. So some of you have a head start on that. Obviously, you know, we have the same goal in mind, is that we're wanting to work towards their support of the Energy Innovation Act, but we also want to learn about them. So doing research on what they've said, what their past actions have been, developing some open-ended questions for those first meetings to find out what they're working on, what their priorities are, what they feel about what are the possible solutions to climate change that they could support, policy solutions, that type of thing. We'll actually have that started on the liaison calls in January, February.
And will you just quickly speak a little to the exit meetings? So for those who are meeting with retired members.
Right now, what's happening in Washington right now is obviously different this year, but they are, as Danny said earlier, they're physically moving desks around. They're moving out of their offices. A lot of the members of Congress have been working from home, or their staffs have been working from home, so that throws a little difference into it. So you may not get, for retiring members, especially somebody who maybe lost their primary, you may not get a face-to-face with a member. It may end up being the staff person. But what you're wanting to do there is thank them if you can for anything that they've done. If they happen to have been a co-sponsor, if there's things you've appreciated for them in the past, it's always lovely to thank them for their service. But getting feedback, getting their viewpoint on what do you think is going to be happening next year? What advice could you give us? Staffers especially can oftentimes have really valuable advice to give us. I've been in staff meetings before where they've really been helpful when I ask, what have I been doing right? How can I improve? What resources were helpful for you? Which were not? Because we are so engaged in this issue, we may not see that in the mirror. And so hearing from them on how we could do a better job, what is their viewpoint on what might happen next year, it can be really helpful in having you adjust your strategy, because clearly we're going to go into 2021 with a strategy of getting the bill introduced on both sides, the Senate and the House, and what are going to be the best ways to do that. And their advice might be very, very helpful. And so open-ended questions that are around that would be great to ask. I wouldn't expect a really long meeting in the case of a retiring member, but we've been fooled before. They know that we're nice people and that we go in with respect and showing appreciation. So sometimes a 15-minute meeting can end up being an hour. Be prepared with extra open-ended questions.
Okay, so we have a couple of raised hands, and we're going to start with Ned. So Ned, you should be able to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Our particular district is collecting lots of postcards that we want to give to our member of Congress. And I was wondering, would you recommend compiling those into a file and then sending that in advance of our lobby meeting to our member of Congress, or is there a better way of doing it?
I think I think it's good to ask the staffer what's the best way that he could receive that. And if you can send it in advance, I think that's great, because the email addresses that you will have will be the staffer emails. You likely don't have your senator or your House member's direct email address. But also there is someone in the office that also actually tracks that. So if you send it to the staff, you might ask them if they can also include it in their official counts of constituent letters or constituent correspondence. So I would consider sending it ahead to the staffer, but you might also ask, should I copy a legislative correspondent on this so it is also part of your official count? Some offices actually tally these by week or by month. So you want the impact of the personal postcards, and you want the staffer to share that with the member, but you also want it in with their official count. So if you have a good relationship with the staffer and can ask that question, maybe you send them in advance, and then when you're in the meeting, ask, should I send a copy to a legislative correspondent? Because they don't always have time to answer every email that we send them. So that might be something where you send them in advance and ask them if they got it and in the meeting, and ask, should you copy a legislative correspondent?
Okay, so next we have Jeannie who has her hand raised. So I'm gonna allow you to unmute, Jeannie, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
So this is something I've asked Amy before, but I thought I'd bring it up again. I wonder if it's possible if we could get our asks a little earlier than we did this last time. We start off weeks ahead, gradually asking with various emails over set periods and things. And I found out at the end I was writing, I'd like to, one of the topics we might discuss is X. Whereas in the beginning, I was saying why, because they just didn't match up. And that was a little difficult to build on.
I totally understand. And I think this year it was much more difficult because we had the election, and a lot of the strategy of what we're doing was based on the election, and the election results, of course, took a little longer than, in fact, for many of you, took a lot longer, depending on your House representatives. So that was definitely a concern. One of the places that you can get kind of the best hint at what we think the ask is going to be is in the suggested meeting request. I try to work with Danny on, okay, what's going to work in various scenarios. And Danny Richter, our Vice President of Government Affairs, creates those asks, but often it has to be done very, very late. I wish I could make all that happen faster, but it really this year was especially challenging because of the elections and because of how long the election counts took, because basically so many of us were mailing in our ballots.
Okay, so next I see Joyce with her hand raised, so I'm going to allow you to unmute and you can go ahead and ask your question, Joyce.
Yeah, one of the breakouts I went to earlier today was Jim Tolbert's conservative breakout, very well attended, by the way, and I highly recommend that you, when that is recorded and posted, definitely watch that. Jim has done some in the past too, working with conservative language, what works, and he's also based that on some of Jonathan Haidt's information from his books. Jonathan Haidt, I can't think of the book that he's written yet. I imagine some of you know it. But there definitely are language and words that connotate different things to conservatives versus liberals. And they discuss a little bit of that in the conservative breakout, where some of them are just signal words, like we've talked about, there's actually been conversations in the forums on community about using the word market-based for some groups, but not for other groups, and justice for some groups and not for other groups. So it is good to try, I'd love to do a whole session on that, but it's good to try to use language that is kind of more down the middle. And so I think many of you might have heard, here's an example that doesn't have to do with climate, but President Obama recently came out discussing how the defund the police wording did not really work it left a lot of people out of the conversation because that framing just took a few people out of the conversation. So what you're looking to do is choose the words that leave it open for most. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I would definitely route you to CCL Community Learning. There's several sessions on working with conservatives, and Jonathan Haidt's book, which, does anybody think of it? If they do, put it in the chat. Oh, there it is, The Righteous Mind. Excellent book, because it talks about the values that conservatives lean towards more heavily versus liberals, and how you can kind of use that as a starting point to pick your words. I hope that helps. That's a whole lesson in itself.
So Amy, I have a few questions about keeping your member of Congress on track. So a lot of them are co-sponsors, but they're not necessarily taking the lead. They're more so they just co-sponsored and haven't really taken on that leadership role. Do you have any advice for helping make sure your member of Congress stays on track and is really a champion of the Energy Innovation Act?
And I have heard that some members will even say, they'll hint towards the fact that they'll vote for it, but they don't want to take the lead on it. And I think what has to happen there is for us to kind of peel the layers back a little bit and try to do some research on why that might be. What are the members' other priorities that he might see as counterproductive to this? So for some reason, he or she is thinking that it isn't in the member's best interest to be a leader on it. Well, why is that? Is there something else they're working on? So it's kind of a process of figuring out why that might be. What does your member want to be a leader on? What's happening in the district that he's needing to keep all of the support in one area, and he's fearful of losing some support by possibly being a leader? So then once you look at that and say, and start to understand why he's not, then you can help to provide him the political cover that he needs. That may mean another lever of political will that you need to work on, whether it's outreach or grassroots outreach, something like that, so that your member sees the benefit. He or she is not seeing the benefit if that's where he's at right now. So what you want to do is find out why is that, what's the worry or concern there, and then see if you can allay those fears. And that doesn't have to all happen in one meeting by any means. That's something that might be take a little time, where in planning for your next meeting, you might do the research, find out if there's ways that you can help him see the opportunity for him having political cover and moving up the ladder to be more of a hero.
Great. Well, thank you, Amy. That concludes our time. So thank you so much, Amy, and thanks all for being here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.